Jinnah had asked for the omission of the words "So help me God." Pakistan's Constituent Assembly first met on 11th August 1947. Jinnah was elected unopposed. One of the biggest curses India is suffering from, I do not say other countries are free from it, but our condition is much worse, is bribery and corruption. A division had to take place. On both sides, in Hindustan and Pakistan, any idea of a united India could never have worked, and in my judgment, it would have led us to terrific disaster. If we want to make this state of Pakistan happy and prosperous, we should wholly and solely concentrate on well-being of the people and especially of the masses and the poor. If you will work in cooperation, forgetting the past, burying the hatchet, you are bound to succeed. Pakistan would be a state with equal rights and equal opportunities without discrimination. No power can hold another nation, and especially a nation of 400 million souls in subjection. On 10th of August 1947, Lord Mountbatten reported to the Earl of Listowel that Jinnah had written to him proposing a few changes to the oaths of office for Governor-General, governors and ministers of state. Jinnah had asked for the omission of the words "So help me God" and had also insisted on changing the word "swear" to "affirm." In the legal sense, the latter part was even more significant than the first, because to affirm is a secular form, an atheistic form in depositions and affidavits, as opposed to swear, a distinction Jinnah was most certainly aware of. It becomes all the more significant when we consider the oaths in the present-day Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which are riddled with religious tests and references. Pakistan's Constituent Assembly first met on 11th August 1947. Jinnah was elected unopposed as the first president of the Constituent Assembly. Speaking after the leader of the House, the leader of the opposition, Kiran Shankar Roy of the Congress Party, spoke of his party's policy, poignantly stating, "Sir, if Pakistan you have in mind means a secular democratic state, a state which will make no distinction between citizen and citizen, which will deal fairly with all irrespective of caste, creed or community, I assure you, you shall have our utmost cooperation." Several other speakers then spoke, including Jahan Ara Shahnawaz and Jogendranath Mandal, but conspicuously absent was any reference to Islam. After listening to them, Jinnah rose to address the House. He started off by speaking about the duties of the Assembly and the government, the foremost duty of which, he said, was to maintain law and order and protect the life, property and religious beliefs of every citizen. He then moved on to the question of bribery and corruption. But what is often overlooked is how he framed it. One of the biggest curses India is suffering from, I do not say other countries are free from it, but our condition is much worse, is bribery and corruption. At the doorstep of Pakistan, Jinnah was referring to the country and Pakistan as the dominion. It was not an idle slip of tongue. He went on to say, "I know there are people who do not quite agree with the division of India and partition of Punjab and Bengal. Much has been said against it, but now that it has been accepted, it is the duty of every one of us to loyally abide by it and honorably act according to the agreement, which is now final and binding on all. But you must remember, as I have, that this mighty revolution that has taken place is unprecedented. One can quite understand the feeling that exists between two communities wherever one community is in the majority and the other is in a minority. But the question is whether it was possible or practicable to act otherwise than what has been done. A division had to take place. On both sides, in Hindustan and Pakistan, there are sections of people who may not agree with it, who may not like it. But in my judgment, there was no other solution, and I'm sure that future history will record its verdict in favor of it. And what is more, it will be proved by actual experience as we go on that this was the only solution of India's constitutional problem. Any idea of a united India could never have worked, and in my judgment, it would have led us to terrific disaster. Maybe that view is correct, maybe it is not. That remains to be seen. Jinnah was saying that India had been divided into Hindustan and Pakistan, but referring to India as something above Hindustan and Pakistan. Significantly, he offered the opinion that an idea of a united India would not have worked and would have led us, Hindustan and Pakistan, to a terrific disaster. It was the only solution to India's constitutional problem. Here again, India. Clearly, Jinnah had not made up his mind as to whether his view was correct. Maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't. This Jinnah left to the verdict of history. He continued, all the same, in this division, it was impossible to avoid the question of minorities being in one dominion or the other. Now that was unavoidable. There is no other solution. Now what shall we do? If we want to make this state of Pakistan happy and prosperous, we should wholly and solely concentrate on well-being of the people, and especially of the masses and the poor. If you will work in cooperation, forgetting the past, burying the hatchet, you are bound to succeed. If you change your past and work together in a spirit that every one of you, no matter to what community he belongs, no matter what relations he has had with you in the past, no matter what his color, caste or creed, is first, second and last a citizen of this state with equal rights, privileges and obligations, there will be no end to the progress you will make. Now he was beginning to answer the question posed to him by Kiran Shankar Roy. Pakistan would be a state with equal rights and equal opportunities without discrimination. Continuing further, Jinnah said, I cannot emphasize it too much. We should begin to work in that spirit, and in course of time, all these angularities of the majority and minority communities, the Hindu community and the Muslim community, because even as Muslims you have Pathans, Punjabis, Shias, Sunnis and so on, and among the Hindus you have Brahmins, Vaishnavas, Khatris, also Bengalis, Madrasis and so on, will vanish. Indeed, if you ask me, this has been the biggest hindrance in the way of India to attain the freedom and independence. If not for this, we would have been free people long ago. No power can hold another nation, and especially a nation of 400 million souls in subjection. Nobody could have conquered you. And even if it happened, nobody could have continued its hold on you for any length of time but for this. Here again, India was a nation of 400 million souls, now divided into two dominions because of internal dissensions. Jinnah said that if this policy of division upon division would continue, it would be endless. After all, most of his career, save the last 10 years, had been spent trying to compose the Hindu-Muslim division and unifying them through a pact. Underlying these words was deep anguish and a nagging question. Had he done the right thing by accepting partition plan? Now it was done, and it was important to make a new beginning, to start afresh on footing of equality and without distinction. Jinnah continued, therefore we must learn a lesson from this. You are free. You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques or any other place of worship in this state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of the state. As you know, history shows that in England, conditions some time ago were much worse than those prevailing in India today. The Roman Catholics and Protestants persecuted each other. Even today, there are some states in existence where there are discriminations made and bars imposed against a particular class. Thank God we are not starting in those days. We are starting in the days when there is no discrimination, no distinction between one community and another, no discrimination between one caste or creed and another. We are starting with the fundamental principle that we are all citizens and equal citizens of one state. The people of England, in course of time, had to face the realities of the situation and had to discharge the responsibility and burdens placed upon them by the government of their country. And they went through that fire step by step. Today you might say with justice that Roman Catholics and Protestants do not exist. What exists today is that every man is a citizen, an equal citizen of Great Britain, and they're all members of the nation. The example Jinnah cited in the speech was Great Britain, which had once been torn apart by the Protestant and Catholic conflict, referring obviously to the events in the Tudor era under King Henry VIII later on. Conditions were much worse in Britain then than there were in India today. He then spoke of states that still had bars on certain communities. Then came the startling renunciation of the two-nation theory. Now I think we should keep that in front of us as an ideal, and you will see that in course of time, Hindus would cease to be Hindus and Muslims would cease to be Muslims, not in a religious sense because that is the personal faith of each individual, but in the political sense as citizens of the state. Jinnah's concern throughout his political career had been the inability of Hindus and Muslims to march together. In face of Congress's refusal to settle the minorities question through a consociational framework, Jinnah had posited the two-nation theory. Having now achieved Pakistan, he wanted to bury it. Prima facie, this seemed like a terrible contradiction on part of Pakistan's Quaid-e-Azam, but taken on a longer timeline, his career from Congress to Muslim League to finally father of the new nation, this showed remarkable consistency and single-mindedness. Jinnah was the same idealistic best ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity despite several blows and what can be described as small deaths he had been when he had first joined Congress in 1904. Events, constitutional deadlocks and an acute feeling of being isolated from his former Congress colleagues had led him to this path to Pakistan, but now having achieved a settlement, he was ready to revert to his old role as best ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. Jinnah was not going to allow any discrimination on the basis of community, caste or creed. This was his answer to Kiran Shankar Roy's question. He spoke of cooperation specifically. I shall always be guided by principles of justice and fair play without any, as is put in the political language, prejudice or ill will, in other words, partiality or favoritism. My guiding principle will be justice and complete impartiality, and I am sure that with your cooperation, I can look forward to Pakistan becoming one of the greatest nations of the world. This speech has created much controversy in Pakistan and a continuous debate over whether Jinnah wanted a secular or an Islamic Pakistan. Perhaps to Jinnah, as a modern Muslim, there was no contradiction between his modernist idea of religion, so watered down and free of ritual and prohibition, ontologically emptied, the idea of a secular state. Significantly, Jinnah had not used the word secular for reasons very similar to why Nehru and Ambedkar would keep the word out of the Indian Constitution initially. The word was too loaded to find broad consensus. However, Jinnah's references not come from religion, certainly not the Islamic faith, which he did not refer to once in his speech. His speech was a summation of John Locke's ideas on toleration and citizenship, which had also been the inspiration for the founding fathers of the United States of America. The fact that the speech envisaged a secular state is undeniable, given that it came in response to Kiran Shankar Roy's question. If Jinnah had wanted to make a distinction between his idea of an inclusive democratic state and that which had been proposed by Roy minutes earlier, he could have said so, but he did not. Avid parliamentarian that Jinnah had been, his record shows that he could never leave a contentious point unanswered. As a lawyer trained in the rules and laws of evidence, Jinnah knew that an assertion not rebutted would become an admitted fact. By delivering this speech, Jinnah made an explicit and clear promise not just to Roy but to all Pakistanis and indeed the rest of India that Pakistan would be a secular democratic state. The kind of secular democratic state Jinnah had in mind, however, was more the British model than the American model. That Great Britain is a secular democracy is an undeniable fact, but it does not quite have the same strict wall of separation between church and state that US does. Similarly, Pakistan was undeniably a Muslim majority state, conceived as such by design, where by virtue of a Muslim majority, the unique Muslim culture would gain civic importance, just as Protestantism had a unique place in British life through the Anglican Church. Yet, there would be an effective separation of religion from the state and no discrimination against any minority belonging to another faith. To do this, Jinnah had to convince his constituents that such an idea, the idea of a modern secular democracy, was not alien to their faith and culture, but rather an integral part of their historical heritage. It was a tough balancing act to counter the excessive claims of his Muslim constituents of Islam's role in polity but Jinnah was the one man entirely capable of doing so, by couching the idea in Muslim modernism. Sadly, no one after him quite held that balance, and in 1949, less than a year after his death, his most capable lieutenants, Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan and Foreign Minister Zafrullah Khan, would help pass the Objectives Resolution, which basically tipped the balance in favor of a religious polity. The 11th August speech undeniably charted out a secular state. It resonated in the Indian Constituent Assembly as well, where Iyengar said on 27 August 1947, "It would not be wrong for me to quote Mr. Jinnah in this connection whatever he might have said before partition. He said, 'My idea is to have a secular state here.' Somebody asked, 'Religious or secular?' He said, 'Hindus and Muslims are alike to me. They must have equal opportunities. I am trying to make a common nation for both of us. Why should our Muslim friends who owe allegiance to Mr. Jinnah and whom they revere as I do think differently in the matter? I am not prepared to call a single individual a minority. I do not like the word minority." This was echoed by B. Pokar Saab Bahadur, who said, "I wonder if my friends who have suggested separate electorate for minorities would appreciate the remarks of a great leader of India. It is Mr. Jinnah who in his address to Pakistan Assembly said, 'We are starting with the fundamental principle that we are all citizens and equal citizens of one state. We would keep that in front of us as our ideal, and in course of time you will find that in political sense the Hindus will cease to be Hindus and Muslims will cease to be Muslims, because religion is the personal faith of each individual.'" That this is what the Governor General of one of the parts of India says. Sir, he was known here to be the worst communalist as it were, but even he, when he takes over the charge of a state, even he, when he takes over the reins of a communal state and the administration of a big country composed of Hindus and Muslims, he says so. It is very well known that this state is a Mohammedan state, and they are proud of it being Mohammedan, and they are proud to call it Pakistan. Even in that state, he says, religion will not be taken notice of by the state. Every individual will be an individual, and Hindus will not lose their Hinduship as far as their political rights and privileges are concerned. I submit, sir. Thus, Jinnah's speech was by and large interpreted as indicative of a secular state even in India. This is not to say that elsewhere Jinnah did not refer to religion at all when addressing the people, but it was always to explain that Islam was compatible with modern democracy and life. Many have attempted to quote these speeches out of context to underscore the contradiction with his 11th August speech. However, a textual analysis of the speech shows no contradiction between what Jinnah said on 11th August and later at the Karachi Bar Association. He said, and I quote, "Why this nervousness that the future constitution of Pakistan is going to be in conflict with the Shariat laws? Islamic principles are as applicable as they were 1300 years ago. Not only Muslims but also the non-Muslims have nothing to fear. Islam and its idealism have taught democracy. Islam has taught equality, justice and fair play to everybody. What reason is there for anyone to fear democracy, equality and freedom on the highest standard of integrity and on the basis of fair play and justice for everybody?" Days before this address, a lawyer from Karachi Bar had written to Jinnah asking him to do away with Western democracy, and Jinnah was now speaking to this audience. It becomes clear that contrary to saying that Pakistan would be imposing an Islamic polity of a specific kind, Jinnah seemed to argue that democracy, equality, freedom, justice and fair play were central Islamic principles extended to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. This was not a vision for a theocratic state, but rather a secular state. He seemed to say that there was no contradiction between a secular democratic state and Islam. Jinnah's references, few and far between, to Islamic principles were always in this light and never outside this framework of equality and freedom. To argue on this basis that Jinnah was backtracking on his 11th August speech is an argument that does not stand the test of facts, especially when we read what he did and what, more importantly, what he refused to do. Not a single law was ever passed in the legislature in his lifetime which could be termed specifically Islamic or Muslim. This was by design.